Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Myers. I'm a member of the board of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and I am delighted to be returning to these interviews with some of the most fascinating people I've ever met with. Today, it's Dorothea Dickerman, who is a member of the board, is a recovering lawyer. I think I can say that,
You may say that.
um, and, and someone who has a great interest in the issues of Shakespeare authorship and conveying it in a very readable and hearable way to those who are also interested. So, Dorothea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bob, for having me.
That's a pleasure. Give me a brief sense of how you discovered the Shakespeare authorship question and your movement into researching it more deeply.
I think I would say it happened in stages for me, starting very early on. I knew the stories from childhood, but it was Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet where I heard the full text for the first time in the theater, and that blew me away. From that, I went to the library and took out old Vic recordings of the plays
Oh,
and
is that
listened to
right?
them one after another on my home phonograph,
Right.
and came to the conclusion, probably somewhere around the time I was 12, that what we would call today the point of view of the author in the plays did not match the story of the author's life that I had been told. And this puzzled me greatly because I felt that the author had to be at court and the author had to be not the king, not the prince or the princess, but just below that strata. And when you're 12 years old and you raise this to your teacher in school, of course, the answer is don't be silly, Dorothea. I remember those words, don't be silly. So I kind of kept it quiet, went to college, was an English major, and in the final semester of my year, my summa cum laude Amherst was locked down. I wasn't going to lose that. I took another course, and this on Shakespeare, it was my third, and this one opened with the assignment to read the sonnets, the first 17 sonnets, which I had never
Hmm.
read.
Huh.
And in reading them, for me, my interpretation of them, which is what the professor asked, was that they were advice from a father to a son for an unknown reason to get married now and have a child now. So I started back with the whole question again, how does this fit in with Willa Stratford's life? Answer, it doesn't. That confirmed to me that I was probably right, that it was someone else. And then the final piece was visiting Stratford upon Avon in my late 20s and
Hmm.
hearing that Willa Stratford may or may not have gone to the local grammar school. And that kind of locked and loaded it for me
Uh,
in my own mind, right? My
yeah, yeah.
conclusion. But I didn't do anything about it until I read Beauclerk's book.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was the first Oxfordian
Charles Beauclerk and
Shakespeare's Magic Kingdom.
Shakespeare
Magic Kingdom, yeah.
Magic
Yeah.
Kingdom.
So I went online. I found the De Beer Society. I found the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and didn't really have time. I had a very busy law practice. I was a mother. It wasn't until very close to my retirement when the SOF held its annual conference in Boston, where my son was living. Then I said, okay, it's a sign. I need to go. And that was my first conference. And uh, Alex McNeil was absolutely instrumental in getting me to join. So thanks, Alex.
That was my first conference too. Okay, so within the fellowship now, outside of all the bureaucratic stuff board members do, you have what's how do you view yourself with the Blue Boar Tavern? Are you the
Well, I would say I have inherited the brainchild of Ben August, who
right?
is also a board member. He began the Blue Boar as a concept, worked through it with a number of alpha and beta uh, members of the cast. And eventually it came to me. I joined the cast in 2022. And after a few sessions, I was like, we should really put these on YouTube because up to that point in time, they are live. What is the Blue Boar Tavern? For those of you who don't know, it is approximately 10 times a year. I won't say monthly, but approximately monthly. Five of us get together on a live Zoom, very much like doing improv without a script, although we do a lot of research on the topic.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we sit around in an imaginary pub called the Blue Boar and discuss history of the time, literature of the time, individuals, Oxfordianism, Stratfordianism as friends.
What's the
So,
connection between the name Blue Boar
uh, well,
and Oxford?
the heraldic symbol, one of the heraldic symbols for the Earls of Oxford was a blue boar. There is actually a blue boar, and I have a tavern, and I have been there, but in England, it is not our blue boar tavern. So I convinced the board to put these, and I think we have maybe 25 or 30 episodes up on YouTube.
Yeah, that's what it is. I counted, I think maybe 22.
It's very close to 100,000 views of Blue Boar Tavern
Is
episode
that all
on
told?
all of them together,
Right.
which is 10% roughly of all video views for the SOF. So the Blue Boar plays a very important role. I'm the person that organizes it. I'm the person who writes the blurbs. The cast decides as a group what topics we take on. I organize any guests who are coming. I rehearse them. I hold their hands once they realize it is truly live. Um, there are some bloopers that can occur on a live
I'm shocked.
improv. Yeah,
I'm absolutely
shockingly.
shocked.
I once got something underneath one of my contacts and my eyes were watering and I kept blinking and blinking and people in the chat were going, "What's she doing? Why does she look so strange?" And I'm reading this on the screen going, normally I would leave and take my contacts out, but I can't do that
Yeah.
right now. So, and then we have sort of a after party where we sit down and talk about what went right, what could we do better, and we try every single time to make the show more interesting, more engaging, uh, and to reach a larger audience.
Do you accept questions during the show and
We
answer them?
do. There is a live chat that goes on where we can, and our able-bodied musical bartender, Jonathan Dixon, does keep an eye on that chat, and he feeds questions to the group. And right now, as of today, the cast members are Bonner Cutting, Phoebe Neer, Alex McNeil, Jonathan, and myself. And one or the other of us can usually answer. And sometimes those questions provoke more questions and more discussion. And we love hearing from our audience members live on the chat.
What do you have coming up for Blue Boar the next couple
So our next episode will be July 29, and we will be discussing Ben Jonson, his role in the production of the 1623 First Folio. We're particularly excited about that show because Jonson has a huge role in the development of that first folio. He had done his own before, and his was the very first folio of
months?
playwrights' works done in the huge size and compendium format. The Folger Library has taken a view that Jonson is to be pushed aside. And we are, of course, reacting to that because we believe that there's a lot about Jonson that leads very directly to De Vere.
And you'll be dealing with that kind of issue in the next Blue Boar.
We will be, and then right, and after that, we will be taking a pass in September because of the SOF's conference.
Oh.
We'll be back in October with a program, a little different format. We try to mix it up where we're each taking our favorite letter of the period and discussing the letter and its impact on Shakespeare and Oxford and the question. And my problem is I have so many favorite letters, I will have to choose One.
Sounds marvelous. That sounds marvelous. Is there a set time and day for these programs?
The day is not set. We try to do it a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night because we figure people tend to be free. It is those nights. It is always at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific, and it is always announced a couple of times on the website through the news items, as well as the
Mhm.
final link that goes out
Yeah.
the day or two before we're actually ready to do the show.
I've really enjoyed them, and I've always felt bad when on a couple of occasions I was out of town, out of the country, doing something else. It was a conflict, but I can go back to YouTube and and see them. So it's really a great endeavor.
Yep,
Um,
if you haven't watched them on YouTube, go ahead and watch them, and we certainly invite everyone to come to the next episode if you can make it.
Cool. Thank you for the invitation. So I also want to talk with you about your absolutely fascinating um, work in Tudor and Elizabethan history, which you do with a really marvelous tone. You have a very nice way of writing and speaking, or writing, because I don't hear you speak, um, about these issues in the times, which may well land up as material for a series of novels that I believe you're going to be working on, or you are working on, and that will be published and available in a few years. So, why don't you tell us about those um, efforts that are on your personal website? Here's the plug, dorotheadickerman.com.
That's correct.
Right? Okay. So, tell us about them.
So I wanted to get to know Oxford as a person, as a man, because I believe no author, no artist does not import his or her own life into the work that they produce, whether it's Beethoven or whether it's Shakespeare. The life is reflected in the work to some degree, even in
Sure.
fantasy work, that even in Tolkien, it's a fantasy world, but it's his life in World War II, that and the rise of Nazism that he is writing about. And Oxford kept slipping away from me. I would see him, I would understand him for a moment, and he was gone. And so I thought, when you really want to get to know a man, who do you ask? And my answer was, you ask the women closest to him because they know everything about him that is really worth knowing. And so I started to focus on three women, Anne Cecil, Oxford's first wife, Elizabeth Trentham, his second wife, and most recently, the unspoken and unknown heroine of many of Shakespeare's plays, Mary Vere, his sister.
Ah,
That led me to doing a great deal of research on the period, on the history, on the international history, the continental history, the personalities, the places. And I travel a lot to every place I write about. I travel there. And I realized that it was a world of intrigue, of secrets, of incredible hypocrisy, of governmental cover-ups, of wild affairs, bastards, um, things that just didn't make it into the history books, including so much about Oxford, who had been sidelined very capably by Alan Nelson in his character assassination of Oxford.
so Alan Nelson is a contemporary historian who taught at Berkeley. Am I correct?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, I just want to make
Yeah,
sure. Alan
right.
Nelson is today, and he wasn't one of those bad guys back then.
No, exactly.
Oh,
Thanks, Bob. So anyway, I realized that there were so many instances where things would happen, but there was a personal reason behind it. And I thought, what a great topic for a blog. So the blog on my website, dorotheadickerman.com, which is up and running now, is these wonderful secrets that come out when you look at it. For example, the last
mhm.
post was about an 1580 proclamation by Queen Elizabeth I about the size of the ruffs that were worn by courtiers
Oh, hmm.
and the lengths of their cloaks and the lengths of their rapiers. And she called the ruffs monstrous and the cloaks ridiculous and demanded that everything be closer to the body. And the question is, why? I ask myself. Think about it. With a larger ruff, it's very hard to get your foil or your sword into somebody's jugular because you
Yeah, I've had
find
that problem. I've had
you,
that problem.
I'm sure you did. And you also know you can hide that metal piece of armor, the gorget, right underneath your ruff, and no one knows you're wearing it. Likewise, with the long cloak, you can hide a dagger of inordinate length or a sword of inordinate length. And she was trying to keep them from killing each other. Okay, so there's a proclamation. There's the secret reason why, but there's even a deeper secret under that. When you realize the day the proclamation came out, Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford, had been imprisoned in his chambers at Whitehall for 2 weeks for issuing a duel invitation to Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. She
Hmm.
she issued the proclamation at the day that Oxford was freed. So, knowing that the
Oh,
dual
that's great. Yeah,
challenge had
I
been
understand.
issued, knowing that Oxford and Leicester have been lifelong enemies, and indeed, when you start to unravel the relationship between Oxford and Leicester, you realize that those two had a 35-year battle between them, and that they wrapped around and around each other in this contest of wills that really defined the age.
Hmm.
So from this one little proclamation, all of this information comes out. And I just delight in writing about that.
It was great stuff. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I hadn't realized how much significant there was to the ruffs and the capes and but this ties it in very, you tied it in very nicely. So,
Well, the heads on the platters are ridiculous looking, right? They are just
right.
so silly, but there is an actual reason for them. And
Hmm.
Her Majesty had had enough. So, but this is all the byproduct of these three women whose stories I took on in intending to write, and I do have one in draft and in edit, historical novels, which I thought was a different way of approaching
Hmm.
the age and the people. Each one of these women ended up being far more fascinating for herself than I gave any of them credit for.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Talk about Elizabeth Trentham, wife number two.
So, wife number two had a father who recognized she came from the Midlands. She came from an upper middle class family. She was not noble. Her family ran sheep farms and corn mills. And her father, who was a representative to Parliament and also one of the men involved in keeping track of Mary, Queen of Scots, during
Hmm.
her 19 years of imprisonment, realized that this particular daughter was different than his other two, that she had a real sense of business, that she had a very cool head. And he brought her with him to from the center of the Midlands and the western part of England to London when he came for Parliament in 1581. And she joined the Six Maids of Honor, was one of the Six Maids of Honor to the Queen. She held that position for 10 years, during which time she was well noted for being in control of herself, in control of the situation, in a court that is full of very nasty comments, a lot of backbiting, a lot of political jostling, and certainly many men who are trying to take advantage of a woman's honor. So I think that she probably would have remained single. Her father put her in charge of her own dowry and her own choice of
That was very rare at the time.
really rare. In Elizabethan England, the laws were designed to protect men, but not to protect women. So, for an example, noble women's marriages, even during their teenage years, might be set up either by their fathers or, if their fathers had died, by their brother, who might be younger,
Hmm.
or a guardian. and they were moved like pawns for family alliances. Women, unmarried women and married women could not own property in their own names by law. Only if they were widowed could they own property.
Hmm.
Women were not allowed to write any type or publish any type of books except for a very prescribed type of them. They were allowed to write elegies for family members or other people, mostly women that they admired, and they were able to translate out of any language, any religious texts. So they couldn't study history.
Hmm.
Um, or mathematics. And so any education that a woman received had to come from her family, mostly her father, which is the case with the Cook sisters. So, how each of these three women navigated that world, particularly about marriage, which is the thing that noble women are to do. It's their job. You get married, you produce a legitimate heir, and that is your job. Each one of these women navigated that in a very different way. In many ways, Elizabeth did not marry until she was, really probably 31 or 32, which was extremely rare. And she married Oxford only because Anne Cecil had passed away from a fever unexpectedly.
Did the Queen sort of act as a middleman, as it were, to bring Oxford and Trentham together, or
No, I think very much the opposite. I mean, I think that the fact that there is evidence to me that the fact that Elizabeth Trentham and Oxford were getting married made the Queen quite jealous. She really was unprepared for it. The wedding gift that she gave them was considerably more stingy than what she had given other maids of honor, and Elizabeth had served her without any issues. I
uh,
mean, gave her no trouble for 10 years of her life. It was really surprising.
so in your historical novels, will these three ladies appear in the same one? Is there a sequence? Are they,
It's designed as a
do we know?
do we know? We do know. It is designed as a triangle. Each of the women has, I will call it her own book, where she is the primary character in that book, but they all knew each other and they all serve the queen and they all appear in all three books. And sometimes there are scenes set, which are reported from the perspective of different of these women.
Oh, that's great.
So you could start with any of them, read any of the books in any order, but the complete story is only told by reading all three. And I am working now on a talk that I will give in September in New Haven at the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's Fall Conference, which runs, I think, the 18th of September through the 21st
Yeah.
on Oxford's sister, Mary Vere Birdie, about
Oh,
whom I think very little is known. And from the research that I've done, she is the forgotten heroine in Shakespeare's plays.
well,
Once you hear the depth of her story, uh, how she managed to marry the man she wanted, although her brother, Oxford, had a very different plan for her, she outmaneuvered him. In all I can say is it's like watching a field marshal pull together troops on a
wow.
field of battle. Mary took her brother out on this issue, and I think she changed his mind for the benefit of all of those wonderful Shakespearean heroines.
Oh, that's
But it's
great.
quite clear he adored her, and in September, everybody will hear more about her and where her courage shows up as the model in the Shakespearean canon.
So I mentioned earlier that I think you write so wonderfully well, word choice and sentence structure. So when do we get to read about these
Well,
three?
right now, Anne's novel is finished in first draft. I am editing it. There is a video of the lecture. I prepared an academic lecture I prepared about Anne, and that is on YouTube. Elizabeth Trentham is outlined. And that is also a lecture on YouTube. You can find those under my name or under the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's name. Mary is at the finished with the research, but at the stage of writing the academic talk, which will then become the novel. I have beta readers that want to read my Anne novel in the fall. And so as soon as I finish Mary's lecture and get back from England, I will turn to really
That's great.
polishing Anne up and making the changes that the audience suggests. Because in the end, if the story doesn't resonate with the readers, then I have not accomplished my job.
So hypothetically, everybody loves your first three books. What's the fourth book?
Interesting question, Bob. I suppose if I were going to stick with the theme,
Yeah.
could pick one of Oxford's daughters,
Hmm.
who also, I mean, Bridget, unfortunately, the middle surviving daughter, has probably the least amount of information out about her. So it would be either Elizabeth Vere, who I believe was Anne's daughter, but not Oxford's. I believe Oxford adopted her, or the youngest, who is Susan, who, of course, married the Earl of Montgomery, who was one of the two brothers who are celebrated in the first folio, the incomparable pair of brothers who very likely financed getting the first folio off the ground.
So I get that you are able to travel somewhat when you're researching something. Um, but how do you do research from your residences in the States when you want to look at go into libraries or whatnot? And is that hard to do?
Um, I look at the travel as the last piece.
Huh.
So my research, I am fortunate to have the Folger Library very close by, as well as the Library of Congress. And those two are a gift. I mean, that's just, circumstance. There is so much online. I prefer primary sources, which is I prefer letters, laws, uh,
Hmm.
court records, deaths, births. Um, I prefer to get my history from reading non-Oxfordian historical books. I read a lot of history books. I read not just about English history. I read about Dutch history. I read about French history. I read about Spanish history because all of those are very much entwined with the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I'm going to go somewhere, I have a timeline, which I've been working on for 10 years, which is over 500 pages long at this point
Oh.
and growing. And I can pull up from that information on time, place, names. I will structure for a trip. I will structure, first, I have to negotiate with my husband about where we're going and when, but I will structure a trip around locations that have to do with my characters.
Hmm.
I will do a meticulous time outline of everything that has to do with that place and those people. Then I will go online. I will do the research about the place. I will go to my timeline and pull in all the pieces that impacted them. And then I go and I know exactly what I want to look at
Right.
when the places are open, making sure they're not going to be closed for restoration or something. It's just fairly typical in Italy, but and that's how I do it. But I need to see these places. I can't write about them if
Yeah.
I haven't been there. It's nearly impossible. And then with some place too, you're looking at layers because London is no longer the London of 1575.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
trying to, I work with maps online a lot, ancient maps and modern maps. I spend a lot of time overlaying them on each other to
Hmm.
figure out what is where. Um, but it's extremely intense work before I go.
Wow, that's great. So, in the few minutes we have remaining, have I missed stuff about your varied post-legal career that you'd like to let us know about?
Well, I said I retired early as a partner from a very large 1,000 lawyer law firm. Um, because I wanted to work on this very question. It's been bugging me since I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly lucky to be able to have the time to devote to that, the resources to devote to it. And the SOF has been instrumental in introducing me to all sorts of wonderful scholars, many of whom I never would have met otherwise.
Mhm.
And not to mention a world of information on both on the website and in interacting personally with them,
That's
including
great.
yourself, Bob. I would never have met you. It's it is a gift, and I feel very lucky. And I just hope I can get these three novels out.
I,
that's
I
the
sign
current
up to read
goal.
them. No, I sign up to buy them.
Okay,
When
okay.
I've done books, I had all these people say, "Well, I'll read it." No, 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 buy it
Buy
then.
it for all Oxfordian authors. Buy it. That's the
Buy the
best.
book. Buy the book. Well, this has been great. I'm glad we were able to put this interview together. I've learned a lot, as I always learn from listening to you, and I'll be seeing you online or in person soon. So
Very good. Thank you so much.
thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.